As a follow-up to yesterday's daily word about the revealing, I thought I would consider one aspect of the book of Daniel that has a bearing upon the revealing of Jesus Christ. That is, the visible presence of Jesus. Well, the book of Daniel, you might say, it's all about the second coming of Jesus Christ. There are a series of visions, dreams, that all end the same way. And that is with, well, for example, the second chapter of Daniel, Nebuchadnezzar had a dream that Daniel was inspired to not only interpret, but to tell him what he had dreamt. Nebuchadnezzar, that is. And that was the dream of this frightening colossus with a head of gold and the breasts and arms of silver and the belly and thighs of copper and the legs of iron and the feet of iron and clay, and stone not cut with hands strikes it. And the stone represents God's kingdom, which brings an end to human rulership. Then in the 7th chapter, we have a vision of the wild beast, and a small horn ascends and it makes war against the holy ones. But someone like a son of man gains access to the Ancient of Days, and rulership and kingdom and authority are given him. And also the kingdom is given to the holy ones of the Supreme One, the chosen ones. Turns out to be 144,000. The 8th chapter as well. A king, fierce in countenance, a fierce-looking king, as the New World Translation revised it to say, he makes war against the Prince of Princes, Jesus, and he brings desolation upon the holy place for a time, but then he is destroyed without hand by the great prince. King of the North and the King of the South have struggled throughout the centuries. The King of the North subjugates Egypt, the King of the South, and then he comes all the way to his end, and there's no helper for him because Michael, the great prince, stands up and destroys him. Michael, of course, being Jesus Christ. So it's interesting there that we, in the 7th chapter, we have mention made of the kingdom being given to the holy ones. In the 10th chapter, Daniel, it's good to keep in mind that Daniel was originally taken captive to Babylon. And the first wave that Nebuchadnezzar had taken from Judah, the noble people and the craftsmen and the upper elite of Jewish society back then. But Jehovah promoted him to a deputy ruler in Babylon. And then when Persia overthrew Babylon, Jehovah again exalted Daniel. And that serves really as a guarantee, you might say, a portent, because Jehovah had told Nebuchadnezzar that he could take down the mighty and bring up the lowliest one of mankind to rule as he saw fit, because God is supreme. And so he demonstrated that in the case of Daniel. But in the 12th chapter of Daniel, and this was after Persia had overthrown the Babylonian kingdom, but the Jews were still in captivity. In the 9th chapter, Daniel had prayed and confessed the sins of his people, and Gabriel appeared to him then and informed him that they would go back to their homeland. But in the 10th chapter, Daniel was again fasting. He said he ate no meat or wine. He didn't put oil on himself, which was a necessity in the arid climate in Asia. But then at the end of 3 full weeks, he was walking along the banks of the river Tigris. and he saw an overwhelming sight. He saw a man. It looked like a man, but it was a superhuman man. He had a belt of gold, and his body was like chrysolite, which was a yellow-greenish gem, an emerald of extraordinary beauty. And his arms were like copper, and his face was as lightning, and his eyes were like two fiery torches. And when he spoke, it was like the sound of a crowd. And as the saying goes, Daniel was blown away. As you can well imagine, he simply collapsed in a heap. He said, my dignity left him. I was in a complete ruin. Well, this superhuman creature came up to him, and Daniel was fast asleep like a dead man. And he touched him and strengthened him. And he called him a very precious man. And again, he had to really revive Daniel to get him up. He was just shivering and shaking. And then he related to him the reason of his visit, and to let him know the things to come that were going to befall his people. And that leads into this epic prophecy of the king of the north and the king of the south, and the ultimate standing up of Michael, the great prince, and the beginning of the new world. Well, you know, angels have materialized to men going way back to Abraham. 3 men visited him. Abraham wasn't struck with terror. He welcomed them to his tent. He had his servants prepare a meal for them. Excuse me. There's a bird pecking on the side of my barn here. I don't know if you could hear that or not, but there was a woodpecker hanging on the eave, drilling. I really have great admiration for those birds. Last spring, a woodpecker started drilling in the peak of the house, right at the very apex where the 2 roofs come together. And I kept hearing this drilling, and I walked out and I'd shoo him off, and he kept coming back, kept coming back. He drilled a hole through there and was building a nest. So I got up on the roof, nailed a 2x4 over it. Problem solved. Now, the next day, I hear the drilling again. And I go, he drilled through the 2x4 in the exact same spot. I went online, and sure enough, it said there's a nesting instinct in certain woodpeckers, and if you live near a woods, which we do, they build a nest in the peak of a house like that. So I just if he's that determined, I'll just let him stay there. There's still a hole up there. I suppose I have to get it patched up again before a chipmunk takes up residence there for the winter, but it's always something out in the country, some kind of critter getting in somewhere. What was I talking about? Angels obviously can appear exactly as humans. Do you recall when Jesus was with his disciples the last time, and he suddenly began ascending into the heavens, and so suddenly 2 men in white raiment were standing there, and they asked him, "Men of Galilee, why do you stand there gazing up into the heavens? This Jesus will return in the same manner." No one in the crowd fell in a heap, trembling, terrified. So my point is, but before that interruption, that And the angel could have appeared to Daniel and said, I'm here to show you the things to come. Or he could have had a vision or a dream. But it was a drama, a portent. Because as I say, the book of Daniel is all about the second coming of Jesus Christ. We know that there is a context to that coming, the development of certain political entities and the persecution of God's people, at which point Jesus Christ intervenes. To really appreciate what happened in the 10th chapter of Daniel with his vision on the river Tigris, in the first chapter of Revelation, John had a very similar experience. He wrote that by inspiration, he came to be in the Lord's day. That is when Jesus begins ruling, as we know. And in his vision, he saw these lampstands, and then someone spoke to him, and he turned around. And he said, it was this vision, his hair was like white wool, and his eyes were like a flame, just like the person that Daniel had seen. And his legs were like burnished copper, and it says he was glowing as the sun when it is at full strength. Similar to the transfiguration. You see how this all ties in? So John, being by inspiration in the Lord's day and having been on the mountain of transfiguration, confirms that the holy ones on earth will see Jesus, even as he was walking in the midst of the golden lampstands, which represents the congregations of anointed persons. And John, being a member of that congregation, was there, and he saw Jesus. And he had the same reaction as Daniel. He fell as a heap, as a dead man. And Jesus came up and put his hand on him. So that it's amazing that the Watchtower, for all their insights, they attach no significance to the vision that Daniel had, or the fact that, the Apostle John saw Jesus and had the same reaction. But it's also interesting in the 10th chapter of Daniel, when Daniel was walking along the Tigris, he wasn't alone. There were 3 other men with him, I believe. But they did not see this glorious man, but they sensed something. It says they ran off. They were terrified, and they hid themselves. And it says, I, Daniel, was left alone. It's similar to Saul's vision on the road to Damascus. He wasn't alone either. But the men with him saw this flash of light, but they did not hear the voice when Jesus said, Saul, Saul, why are you persecuting me? So that helps us to appreciate that Jesus is going to appear to his chosen ones, and no one else will see him or hear his voice. But the chosen ones on earth at that time will. But others will know that something is going on because of what is happening in the world. So I guess I'll just leave it at that. Sorry for the bird interruption there. I'll talk to you tomorrow.